Today is Wednesday, April 22nd, about 9 a.m. Miami time, and I'm here with Sam Jacob. Sam, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to speak with me today.
Sure. Hi.
Sam.
Yeah. Well, I'm here, and I'm here in London. It's just after 2 p.m. And I'm in Islington, which is a district of London, which is sort of like residential, but not that far out from the centre of the city. Like you can walk into to the centre pretty easy in about 20 minutes. And yeah, we're under lockdown, like much of the world, which is a very unusual and interesting experience. I mean, I'm holed up with my daughter, so she's 16, and she was supposed to be doing a big set of exams at 16 for school kids in the UK, which have been cancelled. And she's back at school, so she's like, in a lesson upstairs in her bedroom, which is yeah, clearly a funny experience. But I'm downstairs working away, and then we have our sort of domestic time also. So you could say, yeah, the interior of the space that we were in has been kind of pulled in lots of different directions. A lot of shelves being filled up with tins of tomatoes and bags of pasta where there should be books or whatever. So there's a lot of bleeding between, the ways in which we normally organize our lives. Outside on the streets, it's interesting. I mean, we're sort of allowed out once a day, is the government advice for exercise. So I've been out, maybe 3 times a week on a run. Like I used to run quite a lot, and then I sort of stopped. I've been getting back into it, and the last 3 weeks, I've been running further and further. So I've ran around the neighborhoods, and it's very interesting to see all the familiar places in an unfamiliar situation. I've run a little bit further, so ran into the city of London, which is really interesting to see. Very, very deserted, apart from a lot of people cycling as if it was the Tour de France. Like those thoroughfares, which are usually full of traffic jams, and now like people in Lycra just bombing it along there. So it's really interesting to see, the city transformed, I suppose. Of course, it's perfect for taking architectural photos. No one around, just the building. So I've been lighting up my Instagram feed with a lot of photos of interesting buildings in London.
Sam, has this period of, let's say, confinement changed the structure of your life and work?
Yeah, I mean, so I run an office, and everyone's at home, and taking their big iMacs into their usually kind of like small-ish kind of London apartments, which is also a bit awkward. The kind of computers are balanced on things which they shouldn't really be. Like it's sort of an awkward size, big bit of technology suddenly in these smaller domestic situations. We've been working through some projects which are still going on. We're still working away on, still designing. Some sort of like competitions which are being run under these circumstances, which is really optimistic of certain clients, but it also, maybe it is a good time to think about things and prepare for the future. That's really different. But then also, it's been a time, I think, to think about things that, and I've been making some work which I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. I've written a couple of pieces, one for Art Review, just about the situation, which I definitely wouldn't have done without without the current circumstances. And I guess the sort of biggest gesture I've done is to start a thing called the Desktop Design Academy, which is a way of maybe first of all a way of like finding something to do, to give a kind of regular timetable to the week, which of course is all fragmented. what's the difference between Wednesday and Sunday now? Not much, if there ever was. If you're in practice, you kind of often find that the weekend and the weekday is very similar. But this came about really from an old idea that maybe there are ways, the things that happen in teaching, we think we could set a design project and we can think about things. In architecture schools, it feels to me that often a lot of really great ideas happen really early on in a project. And that by the time you're like, okay, we've got to design a building, fine. It becomes a different thing. But I've always enjoyed that moment where you're saying, like, really, how can design help us think about the world? Design not only as a solution, but design really as a kind of form of philosophy or form of critical engagement with the world. The sort of lockdown plus that kind of intention, that drive, has been the basis for the Desktop Design Academy, which is really a simple idea. It's a brief every week, brief on Monday, review on Friday. Anyone can take part. And the briefs are, on the one hand, really simple. On the other hand, like maybe prompt thinking about the way in which we live and the assumptions that we've made about how we live. So brief one was the souvenir. Like, clearly in a time when no one can travel, like, what might a souvenir be? Now, I've always found things like souvenirs to be really fascinating objects, which are not normally thought of as part of the design canon, right? Like, there's not a piece of high design, a souvenir that you get from a souvenir stall. It's like usually a mass-produced piece of plastic in the shape of whatever famous building in whatever city you might be in. But I've always had a soft spot for them. I've always had this idea that oh wow, actually the tradition of the souvenir goes back to something like the Grand Tour, when the aristocracy would go on their journey and they would kind of educate themselves amongst the ruins of classical culture, and they would meet great figures of the continental Italian Renaissance, and they'd come back to somewhere like the UK, and these fragments of stuff they picked up, whether it was a book, whether it was a real lump of antiquity, or maybe something which had been knocked up by an Italian craftsman or Italian artist, actually the ways in which culture was transmitted. So it was the way in which the English learned about classicism was through this stuff. And I always thought, well, maybe there is a kind of long kind of thread that you could, take your kind of plastic Eiffel Tower and trace the story of souvenirs back through history all the way to those kind of maybe like more canonical moments. First one was souvenir. Second one was time. So brief about time was, again, on the one hand, a very simple one, design a clock. And of course, there's been many designers who've designed clocks, and we began with references from the incredibly ornate clocks of kind of the Middle Ages, which could tell you all kinds of things about the cosmos and the movements of the stars and this kind of stuff. But they were also kind of symbolic. They were telling time, not because you just needed to know the time. They were there to kind of communicate an idea about the universe. And of course, that's always part of the design of clocks. That there's a sort of subtext to what they are and how they're communicating with you. And it felt also that time itself has become something slightly different, because we're not governed by exactly the same timetables as we usually are. So it felt like maybe there's a way of using design to think about how time is passing, or how we might record time. Then we did the bed. A lot of us are conducting quite a lot of our lives from bed. I'm not in bed at the moment, by the way. But
no, you have a virtual background.
I do. It's not masking a bed, but we've even seen some of our politicians, like kind of like conducting their interviews in their bedrooms. Like, which is a kind of really weird, the room which is supposed to be, or typically is the most private of rooms, suddenly becomes a public space. So, kind of what does that, lots of questions like that. This week's brief is about clothes. So, if clothes are often part of the way in which clothes, the kind of role of clothes is to kind of contextualize us for events like a suit or a ball gown or whatever. What happens when those contexts no longer exist? Like, what should I have put on for meeting you, Carie? I mean, we don't know each other, so I felt I couldn't wear my dressing gown. But if this week's is thinking about like how we might think about clothes in a slightly different way, or even on a practical level. Will there be issues of public health that might be integrated into clothing in a way which is sort of kind of becomes more normal, that once we do head out from our homes and back into larger groupings of people, how will we feel about that? Will we remember, that our experience now, or whether it's, kind of facts, or whether it's a psychological kind of idea of distance? So I think, in that sense, all of the briefs are kind of designed to help us think about certain quite fundamental issues. And it's been fantastic. We've had people from all over the world contributing, and we've had special guest reviewers, again from the US, from China, from the UK, and so I think we'll keep doing it for the foreseeable future. But it's been a really fun experience so far, and it seems people also are enjoying participating in something which it's serious, but it's not serious. You can spend 5 minutes on a little sketch, or you can spend 5 days if you want to. There's no good and bad. There's no certificate. There's no, it's not for anything. So I think in that sense, it's a nice opportunity to think about some of the things which happen inside architecture education, design education, what they might be able to do once you take them outside of that context. Maybe it's even not designers who are participating. So that's really fun and exciting, and maybe also something which is a valuable lesson is, as the traditional ways in which the world has been organized, of course that has, there's a reason why that has been the case, but often that organization kind of prohibits as much as it enables. And maybe our experience now is allowing us to think about different ways of connecting, or different ways of operating.
Yeah, I actually, in hearing you speak, I'm reminded how moments of, let's say, crises are also opportunities for innovation, which is what I believe that your initiative is also about, seeing design in all things, right? In the ordinary and not just the extraordinary. And also the possibility of perhaps compressing the time frame for design work, which oftentimes in a typical semester is extended over, let's say, 16 weeks. And so I think you're also, through this project, testing out what is possible in very short, as you described them, briefs for very short periods of time. But I think it's a good segue maybe into the next question, which again, I know we're early on in this, but what impact do you think this lockdown might have on the world of architecture moving forward, or even architectural education?
Yeah, I think there's a whole range of things which are kind of unfolding in a way which is kind of we're all just trying to kind of grapple with. I mean, from very practical things like, some of the clients we're working with, who own big parts of the commercial West End in London, all of their tenants are closed: offices, shops, food, bars, and so their question is, what will they do in the medium term? What will it take to keep that going? And the consequence for architects then is like, well, what work will there be? Same with kind of cultural funding for projects that comes from public money, which still happens a little bit here in the UK. So a lot of questions like, what kinds of projects will exist? Will there be more kind of like commercial office space? Will this experience of such a large proportion of the working population working remotely, will that have a legacy? So will that mean lots of empty real estate? And if it does, what might that become? What will happen to all those co-working spaces where the idea of bringing people together in sort of compression was part of the deal? It was part of what you were paying for, was like to be in proximity to lots of other people. Will we think about that differently? And if we think about it differently, what would you extract the sort of positive things of those kinds of ideas about proximity and crossover? Kind of how can you like kind of untangle that from maybe kind of public health concerns? I mean, the one thing I've been thinking of a lot is the basin in the hallway at the Villa Savoie. So this like a freestanding piece of plumbing in a space which is not a bathroom, or a kitchen, like, and it's to do with entry into the house. And I'd always been told, and it was because cars in those days, and of course the Villa Savoie is like kind of very car oriented building, at least on the ground floor. Cars in those days were very oily and dirty, and of course you want to clean up before you come into your white interior. But somebody pointed out to me, actually, whenever it was, like 1920, whenever the Villa Savoie was, that's not so long after 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic. And then there was a whole series of other modernist buildings where, yeah, weirdly, there's a basin near the front door. I mean, I have absolutely no evidence for this apart from conjecture and conversation, but that the idea of that hygiene moves out of where we normally deal with hygiene, which is like you put it in that room there and you shut the door and that's hygienic in there. I'm not suggesting that the rest of your house isn't hygienic, but it's a different idea of hygiene, right? And subsequent to that, we're working on the sort of the fit out bit of a house that I'm working on, which is a house for myself. And we needed to change a few things because there were a few issues with, and one of the things that I've introduced, we've just been drawing it this morning actually, is to put a basin near the front door. Like, it's not enclosed, it's not quite as surreal as Le Corbusier's like freestanding one, but it will be there. And think about that idea of threshold. Like, maybe that's one very, very tangible kind of way in which an idea of the organization of space might change. So from, I don't know how it was in Miami just before lockdown, but if you went into a public building of any kind, there'd be like a hand sanitizer like on top of the reception desk, which was obviously good thinking, but it clearly wasn't something which had been thought about previously. And so I'm wondering about those kinds of ideas. Like, will we begin to think about the organization of space, especially inside and outside, in a slightly different way, not just to do with light and kind of feeling, which I think is what it's become, but maybe in a more fundamental way of like, to do with issues of of hygiene and the body in space.
I mean, I think that's a really an interesting point, and a point that comes from the point of view of the architect, right? Who's thinking about how you can implement changes with physical design. And I'm thinking that what you're talking about is really sort of architecturalizing the elements associated with hygiene, be it the entry threshold, or I'm made to think about, for example, mud rooms, right? I mean, we right now have adopted removing all of our shoes before we enter the house. And right now they're sort of sloppily all over the door, but I was thinking if there was a vestibule or a threshold, to use your term, where one can not only remove the outer world prior to entering the inner world of the house, but also incorporate the kinds of elements you're talking about. I think that I think you could certainly see how those things could be added to the existing domestic interior. So I'm really, first of all, I'm grateful that you took the time to speak with me today. I think you have a lot of very tangible projects and ways of thinking, which I think at least are valuable to me as part of this conversation. And again, I hope that in the near future, we'll be able to connect in the physical world, be that in London or hopefully in the US. And I really wish you continued health and safety and all the best with the projects, both on the boards and the ones that you are inventing.
Thank you very much, Carie.
Thank you so much.